Right. Hello, everyone. So today we are hosting a ARCHER2 webinar looking at the science behind the image competition. So every year we run an ARCHER2 competition to look at some of the images produced by the service. And we started last year running a series of webinars, in this case, just one, related to some of the outputs to get the people who submitted to talk a little bit more about how the visualization was done and what was the underlying processes which were generating that output. We've got 5 speakers today. We're going to run this session kind of in a lightning talk fashion. So each speaker will have sort of 5 or so minutes to speak through what they want to present. And then we will take questions for each person, probably only get to 1 or 2, and then move to the next. So I've said enough already. And to start us off, we have Guillermo, who's going to begin our session. Please take it away.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the introduction and the allowing me to present a bit of my work. I've been doing a lot of work on ARCHER2, so thank you for your fantastic service. And thank you for accommodating sort of my schedule, as I will have to drop off as soon as I finish to meeting captures. So the reason behind this particular study is work we're carrying out for Rolls-Royce using high-order tools, and the reason behind this is because nowadays you're starting to have the computational resources, starting to have the computational schemes as well that allow you to go into more and more detail in terms of physical sort of flow structures. And why do you need that? Well, because jet engines, manufacturer like Rolls-Royce, has a lot of complicated flow phenomena occurring in the engine, and you want to try and understand the physics behind it in detail, what causes the separation, where does separation occur, when does flow transition to turbulence, and even performance improvements of less than 1% can be critical. And you look at stuff like boundary layer status, where you have heat transfer and aerodynamic losses. These are the main aspects you're going to be looking at. The reason behind this particular test case, so this high pressure turbine, is a component in the jet engine which sits at just behind the combustor. So you have fan, compressor, so the fan is just a big compressor, the compressor, the combustor, and then high pressure turbine, which is this, and then low pressure turbine. So in this case, we had this particular configuration, which is a stator, so it does not rotate. It's fixed as a full 360 annulus, so it gives us a little bit more ease of simulation. And there's a lot of complex flow phenomena that occurs in this case. And for this particular test case, the LS89, we have a lot of experimental data for sort of validation. It's one of those classical cases, a bit like NACA 0012 or NASA 37, if you're familiar with these, ACME body if you do cars, and so on. So there are 2 flow conditions we considered. So this is the first time we run these particular cases with the flow solver Nectar, which is a high order spectral HP element, right? So it's a finite element solver. So we decided to opt for 2 different conditions with clean inflow. That means you have no inflow terminals. And one is a low suction, so you have a very high back pressure. So you can imagine high back pressure means that you're not sucking the flow out, you're sort of not making it accelerate that much. So this is sort of a more common flow condition, and you can see the flow you have here. So the clean inflow, if you look at the left-hand side image, sort of, which is 2D, so you only have, well, actually, it's only in the X direction, which is from the left to the right of the page, hits the blade, then goes around the suction side, which is the curved part here where my mouse is. Hopefully you can see that. And then because of the curvature, instability start to occur, and you have turbulent transition, so it goes into fully 3D, and you have sort of vortices appearing that then get convected downstream, as you saw on the right-hand side images, right? So you have these very pretty sort of structures forming that get convected downstream, diffuse, both in terms of because they diffuse naturally, but also because the mesh is coarse. So these are very expensive calculations we've been running, and you can see it particularly in the entropy at the bottom. So the top is the Mach number, and the bottom is the entropy, and you can see sort of these very pretty structures forming with high sort of values in the core of the vortex and then sort of get diffused as they propagate downstream. On the upper side here, you have periodic boundaries, so of course things propagate through these. However, there's a bit more interesting case here. So this is the low back pressure, so that means that you're sucking out the flow significantly. And what happens is a shock develops right at the trailing edge, so you're very close to what is known as choke for these conditions, and you still have a very highly energetic vortex structure coming from the trailing edge, where the pressure on the suction side, so the two sides of the airfoil flow meets and sort of forms these high energy structures, which are really complicated to get to sort of work with the flow solver in 3D. We're having a lot of difficulty because of the high energy that is generated by the high suction. And then you have sort of the unsteadiness of the shock. And to sort of show you the importance of using these methods that allow you to sort of resolve flow features correctly, I've put on the right hand side a standard time average RAND solver and a unsteady Nectar++ time average solution, and you can see the difference. Despite being at the same conditions and same boundary conditions, you do see the shock being effectively a straight line in the case of the RAND solver, so less accurate, whilst if you time average an actually set of instantaneous solutions, you get sort of the right shape, because it's the thing is oscillating above the boundary and interacting with it in quite an aggressive manner. And then of course the wake propagation being pretty uniform in the case of the RANDs, whilst in the case of the instantaneous time average solutions it's less so, because you don't have these vortices are not at every location at every time step, but sort of propagate throughout the domain, so you're going to get a void and therefore get less dissipation than what the RANDs predict. So this is a quick overview. Hopefully I managed to sort of convey a message. If you have any questions, feel free to ask now or contact me later.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the chat? Let's see any. So I have one, which kind of one I'd like to ask is, in terms of the output you generated, do you have an estimate of how much machine time that would have taken to run those simulations?
So, for example, well, these are very expensive in terms of, so for example, this one we're still trying to get to work in 3D. And you can imagine the axial chord of this particular geometry. So the axial chord is from the leading edge to the trailing edge. So if you imagine a line like that, it's not the true chord because it's at an angle, it's the axial chord. It's about 3.7 centimeters, so it's a really short thing. And to have 10% extrusion, so that means basically half a centimeter, it cost us basically, well, it takes about 8 runs for 24 hours on 100 nodes each, is to have LES range. So it's a very expensive case because it's got such high suction and it requires such a fine mesh to be able to be in the appropriate LES range. So the actual estimate is, let's say, from a cold start, so you have just a guess, an initial guess, you'd need probably 4 runs on 100 nodes for 24 hours, and then another 4 to be able to actually time average your solution once it's sort of converged and gotten rid of the initialization.
Thank you very much. I don't see any other questions in chat, and let's try and keep us to time. I'm going to thank you very much for your presentation and ask us to move to the next speaker at this stage.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'll have to leave now because I have another meeting. So apologies for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Jan, could you share your slides?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's been privileged to share the video like from our half-linear simulations. It's mainly about the direct luminous simulation of combustion, basically flame turbulence interaction. So it's the simulation we've been like recently done in this summer. So everything is quite new. So basically, why we're doing that? So it's about the like the carbon neutral fuels, for example, the hydrogen and the ammonia, so the chemistry without carbon are the key to the net zero. So even like people believe electricity cars can be used, but eventually for the heavy transport industry like ship, even the aviation, we still need fuels with a high density of energy, such as like hydrogen. So, but before using these carbon neutral fuels in scale, we still need to thoroughly understanding the combustion mechanism, because for the conventional engines and combustion engines we use like the current fuels, the combustion mechanism could be quite different. So to use these hydrogen fuels with a high efficiency, necessary research should be done. And we also know that flame in a laminar flow has a very steady velocity, like these blue laminar flames. So it's, you see that it's quite steady with time. It has fixed shape, and it can be well predicted with theory or with safety solvers. But when you have the turbulence in your flame, so this velocity, the shape, and the combustion process can be largely different from the laminar flow. So we need a lot of research into this turbulent flame. And in this study, we use the numerical approach we named direct numerical simulation, DNS. So basically, DNS resolves the turbulence down to this small scale, the dissipation scale, or the chronograph scale. So the simulation can provide detailed temporal and spatial information on fluid dynamics. You see, this is some examples. For the RANs, you basically only get the mean flow. For the LES, you get large scale motions, but for the DNS, you get all the motions from the large scale to the very small scale. So you have the database, a very comprehensive database with all the information inside. But it's also relatively computational more expensive than the LES and the RANs. And for the DNS of a reacting flow, like combustion, we need to resolve not only the turbulent motions and all scales, but also the detailed chemistry. Sometimes these chemical reactions happens and the smaller scale, and sometimes even under like close to the molecular scales. So which means it's even more difficult and challenging to do compared with a normal DNS with pure flow. So basically, because of this requirement for the high fidelity, so DNS naturally use high order numerical method to obtain high spatial temporal resolutions, and we also need a safety solver that can efficiently run on modern HPC systems. Now there is the state of the safety soft code can be used for like use both CPU and GPUs. And this is a code we're using. We named it ARCHER2. So it's advanced flow simulator for turbulence research. So it's basically a compressible solver on structure mesh. So it's a high order finite difference method. So normally we use a 6th order compact scheme for shock-free flow, or we use like 7th order shock capturing scheme for the problems with strong compressibility. And it also has the multi-physics capabilities, so we can use to simulate chemistry, reacting flow, also with particles MHD, but this is for the future plan. So basically we tested, we benchmarked the ARCHER2, so it's give quite linear accelerations up to 100K cores. So it's quite been widely used in different studies, such like the turbulence study, classic channel flow path cylinder airfoils, and also being used in the combustion with different configurations, the isotropic flow with the combustion, the jet flow, and even the supersonic combustion. And mostly it's been used for the high-speed flow with shock waves, so different types of the shock wave boundary interaction, strongly compressible turbulence, the cavity flow, supersonic cavity flow. So with this solver, we'll be able to study like the high-speed flow with combustion. So this is the equation we solved. So basically, it's a Navier-Stokes compressible Navier-Stokes equation, but with extra terms to model the chemistry. So we have the terms for the mass fraction transportation with different species, and we have extra terms such like the heat source from the reaction, and the different diffusion coefficient and the production terms from the due to the chemistry. And for that reason, we coupled our ARCHER codes with open source chemical connected software Cantera. So basically, when you run simulation, the ARCHER give the flow variables like density, pressure, temperature, velocity to the Cantera, and the Cantera gives back some chemistry variables such like the reaction rate, viscosity, diffusion coefficient, so on and so forth. So for that, it gives the ARCHER the ability to simulate the reacting flow. So we first studied to simulate the reacting flow in the 1D problems. So this is like a 1D burner. So we first put a high temperature zone to ignite the flow field, and the flame will progress to the both side. So we see this high temperature means the reaction is on, so the flame is moving forward. So we can track the flame. So we can record when flame reach to the first station and then to a second station. In this way, we can calculate the burning velocity. So we calculate the burning velocity, we benchmark with the experiment data, is give a perfect agreement. And then we put like the 2D simulation. So we have a 2D burner, similar with the 1D case, but we add a bit of a vertical flow to see how the flame responds to the fluctuations of vertical motions. So this is case we get. So when the vertical interacts into the high temperature zone, we see the flame front is highly distorted. In the meantime, we see the steady flame starting to progress to the upstream direction. So which means the whole combustion process is highly sensitive to the fluctuations from the oncoming flow. That's why when we design the engines, we need to be careful with the fluctuations. So then first of all, we do this 3D simulation. So we put like a 3D duct. So we use a strong, we use a body force to generate the turbulence flow. So it's used to mimic the experimental study in the Leeds University. They use the 4 fans, electrical fans, to generate turbulence. But here we use a body force. So they do this experiment is this like a sphere tank. So we use body force, and you see that the whole velocity fluctuations can be at a very similar level with this experimental facility. And now we have this cool video from this is the flame. First is the planar flame, but then you have like the vertical, like worm-like structures because of turbulence, and you will see the interaction between the turbulence and the flame. I also have some soundtrack to this video, so you will see some the mix of the flame sound and some music. Hope you enjoy it. So basically, you would see that this like the turbulence, the flame has been highly disturbed by the turbulence, and its shape changes, and because of the change of the shape and the spin rate, the local flame speed will be very different from the laminar case. We're still processing the data, and we hope to dig more physics behind this very interesting hydrogen combustion case. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your very interesting talk. I'm going to ask one quick question as it's in chat. So in terms of the visualization, what tool are you using? Is this part of the commercial software, or are you using another tool in order to present the
for the video, I just use ParaView.
Okay, it's using ParaView. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think to keep us on track, I'm going to have to move on there. Thank you very much for your interesting talk. And Juan Carlos, are you ready to present your slides, please?
Thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you also for the great service that I have been using during my PhD. I will talk today about my entry, which I call the self-amplification and structured chaotic C. Just to start, I will talk a little bit about the numerical setup that we have used. We are working with a wing, NACA 0018. It's a 10,000 Reynolds number, angle of attack 10. So we have a wing tip, so a wing with a finite, with a tip side, which induces stringwise vortices. So we have a fully 3D shear flow compared to an infinite spanwise, where you have a shear flow that resembles or has 2D characteristics. The nature of our work requires from us to have a very high good resolution in order to balance equations and etc. And the way we have estimated the resolution is using a ratio, which I will explain you now. We use finite volume method, so we have cube cells, we have cells, and we have used the cubic root of the size of our cells, and this number we have divided by the size of the Kolmogorov length scale. The Kolmogorov length scale is the smallest scale within a turbulent flow. The values we have reached are below 2.5. This means basically that if you see our cube, our cell, we are able to resolve two eddies of the size of the Kolmogorov length scale, which is in accordance with the recommendations we have. And in some other works, we go also sub-Kolmogorov. We have validated this work, and you can see also in we work more in vortex dynamics that we publish in Physical Review. A few words on the motivation. Why do we care and we work with small-scale dynamics? You can imagine, for example, you have a turbulent flow and you have a signal and you want to measure the fluctuating velocity. If you measure this velocity, where you would get, if you get the probability density function, is basically a random distribution, almost Gaussian, which is Gaussian because it follows the random distribution of the vortices. So it's a lot of chance here. It's not really much physics. And it goes with a famous quote that the turbulence is unpredictable. However, if we start taking the derivative of these fluctuating quantities, the picture changes, and we start following now the physics, as you see here. So our probability density function is not determined anymore by chance, but rather by the local dynamics of the flow, as these points in the neighborhood of these points are highly correlated. And if we keep increasing the grade of our gradients, we come closer to very interesting features or mysters of turbulence, which has to do with intermittency, geometrical features of the Navier-Stokes, and so on, which brings us closer to fundamental laws. As you can see here, for example, it's a signal of entropy production, highly intermittent. At this point, however, it's important to know that there is a limitation in what turbulence modeling or even LES can reach. So at this point, it is not possible anymore with those modeling approaches to reach what we do. So basically, with DNS, we are able to capture things that people working in LES, for example, are not able to capture based on isotropic conditions. Just to give explain very basically the sketch. So we have our velocity gradient tensor, which follows dynamics. We can split this into strain and vorticity. We have a vortex and we have a strain field, and this strain field acts on the vortex filament. As you can see here in the picture, we have here a concentration of vorticity and the strains around there. And basically the basic cartoon of the vortex cascade is that we want to conserve momentum, and as we stretch the vortex, the cross-section will get smaller and smaller and smaller to the point until it's small enough that viscosity can act on it and dissipate. That's the basic idea of the turbulence cascades. Of course, there is a lot of exceptions. You have inverse cascades and non-locality, large scales acting on the small scales, vice versa. But to gain an intuition of how it is, for example, take a look at the eddy E3, and you can start to see how the eddy disintegrates and it starts getting into smaller and smaller eddies. So coming now to my picture, what we have, the ones that I presented in image competition, we have the display of the contours of vortex stretching and strain rate self-amplification, something that you have seen probably in homogeneous isotropic turbulence in the last 20 years. However, there are a few occasions where this has been shown in a flow of industrial relevance, such as this one. This is a recirculating flow, which is very hard to model and fully three-dimensional in the sense that if we take a look at the span-wise distribution compared to boundary layers or also jets where you have circumferential similarity, this is fully inhomogeneous at each distance along the span-wise, which is a challenge to balance the transport equations as we don't have enough samples. So we see here the Q criterion where we capture the vertical structures. And just to go into the big picture of this, you can have a sense of the complicated nature of how the complex strain and vortex field behaves. Homogeneous isotropic turbulence, you have a lot of assumptions which makes it more predictable in terms of what you can get, but the fact that we don't have these assumptions enables us to also to discover new features. And as you can see here, a strain gets amplified at the same way this amplification reacts back on the strain. It's like a circle that follows, and the strain rate field also acts in the vortex stretching. Vortex stretching reacts back into vorticity and comes back. Highly complex phenomena here. And the fact that we have a flow that is not studied before is a good ground to get the new flow physics. Just to conclude my last slides, which has to do with the title, what I call this chaotic sea, is actually, despite the highly disorder that it might show, there is a lot of coherence in certain points of the flow where for example, in this displaying, which in this yellow contour, I'm computing the alignment between vorticity and the strain rate, and as disorder, as the disorder you can see in the average sense, turbulence tends to cluster at the specific forms, in this case on angles, and this is what makes it to bring a bit of order in the statistical sense, despite the highly disorganized nature of turbulence. And yes, to conclude my talk, I would like to thank again Archer for the service, and also my scholarship provider, Pronabec of Peru.
Thank you very much. So if you just go back to that slide, I was just interested in how the coloring here relates to the physics.
Yes.
What's basically painting the image, really? Could you talk about that briefly?
So the transparent contours, isocontours that you see here are the Q criterion, which I have used, I think it's called, I have made it transparent. And what you see here in the, probably here is better, the light green are the contours of a strain, and the purple ones are the production terms of it. So in many cases, they just superimpose to each other.
Yep.
And I have used transparency here and also different types of shades to make this happen and to try to see inside the eddies, basically. And what we see here in the plane is the measurement of the alignments, and I have basically do a cross section of the flow, and with some transparency we can see how the whole flow behaves. If that is what you ask.
Thank you very much. Again, in the essence of time, I'm going to move to our next speaker, but thank you very much for presenting your work.
All right, my pleasure.
Max, are you ready to present your slides?
Hiya. Yeah, I should be sharing now. So can you see that and can you hear me?
Yeah, it's just come through and I can hear you fine.
Okay, great. Well, yeah. So I guess first of all, thanks for having me, and thank you to Archer for providing such a great facility for running all these models. So just to start with, I guess. So this is the image that was submitted, which is just a still from our ocean model showing sea surface temperature from our ocean model along the coast of Morocco. So first, I was just going to talk about some background to the project and what the model was kind of developed for before going into, I guess, more of the details of the model. So this was a Innovate UK and NERC funded project between the Scottish Association for Marine Science and a company called Brilliant Planet. And Brilliant Planet, they remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. So we know from the latest IPCC assessment that in terms of climate change, just stopping emitting carbon dioxide tomorrow is no longer good enough, and we need to remove some of the carbon dioxide that's been emitted historically. So that's what Brilliant Planet are doing. They're doing that by growing microalgae in these huge ponds on desert land. So this is their current site in Morocco. So yeah, what happens here is the microalgae, they choose strains that are a high percentage carbon in their biomass. So as they're growing in the ponds, the biomass doubles approximately every day. They absorb carbon from, well, the water absorbs carbon from the atmosphere, which is then into the water, which is then incorporated into the algal biomass. And then when it's filled the pond, it's dried and buried, locking the carbon dioxide away from the atmosphere on timescales of approximately 1,000 years, so with relatively high permanence. And so to achieve this, you have to move a significant amount of water. So you can see this pond, as I say, the site is in coastal Morocco, adjacent to the coastline. We bring in nutrient-rich water from the ocean to feed the algae in the ponds. Then the algae remove the carbon from the seawater, so then that seawater is then put back into the ocean once it's been deacidified. So had the carbon dioxide is an acid in water, so that's removed. So the water put back into the ocean is essentially it's put back to kind of a pre-industrial ocean conditions, so reversing ocean acidification, which is another symptom of climate change. So the ambition of this company is then to scale up to have a huge number of ponds, and this is at this point you're removing kind of gigaton scale carbon dioxide, but then you're also moving millions of tons of seawater per day. So where we came in, just on this third slide, this is kind of a schematic of the operations of the farm and the ponds. And as I say, the key points here is you have to move a huge amount of seawater, and there's this number one down here, the seawater intake. So we have to So where we came in is we wanted to build a coupled atmosphere ocean model to be able to predict the nutrient content of the coastal ocean. So then we could predict the nutrient content of the seawater that the seawater intake that's feeding seawater into the ponds. And because this is coastal Morocco, it's a predominantly upwelling region, so it predominantly upwells high nutrient-rich cold water from the deep ocean up to the surface. So if our model could then predict the timing and intensity of this upwelling, we could predict the nutrient content of the water that we're feeding into our ponds. And then the second use of the model is to do with the seawater outlet. So this seawater is then deacidified in the ponds and released back into the ocean. So we can then use our model to track where this deacidified seawater goes once it's back into the ocean. And because it's deacidified, it's basically setting up a larger gradient between the carbon dioxide concentration of the atmosphere overlying and the carbon concentration of that seawater that's being put back in the ocean, which means you increase the ocean absorption of the overlying carbon dioxide. So if we can track where the seawater goes and ensure it stays at the surface, then we can calculate the additional CO2 that's absorbed back into the ocean. So it's almost like an additional method by which more carbon dioxide is then removed from the atmosphere. in addition to what's removed in the ponds. So this is the model we built. The atmospheric component, we used the weather research and forecasting model. And I should have said at the start, we kind of wanted to base this all on open source tools. And the ocean model used the finite volume community ocean model. So this is a simulation of seawater temperature. So you can kind of see eddies forming along the shelf break here. And then if we remove the seawater temperature, you can see the underlying unstructured mesh of the grid. And that was the sort of the Moroccan coastline. You can see the kind of Canary Islands shown here in the topography. Bathymetry. And then this is, I'll talk about it in the next slide. So this is an isotherm of where the cold water is. So it's been shown in a few studies that basically the nutrient-rich upwelling water strongly correlates with the nutrient content strongly correlates with temperature. So because it's an upwelling regime, you get this cold water that's upwelled, which is also dense in nutrients. So from our model, if we can predict the temperature distribution, we can then infer or use that as a proxy to the nutrient content. So this is showing the 17.5 degree isotherm and how it affects up and down the Moroccan coastline. And we can, as I say, correlate this with the nutrient content. And our site down here approximately, so we basically want to predict where this isotherm is touching the coastline and sort of covers our nutrient, our seawater intake. So then the second use of the model was then to track the discharge of this deacidified seawater. So that's what's shown here with a dye release model. That's then sort of bolted onto our FECOM model. And because it's the Canary coastal current goes kind of north to south, so you can see our released deacidified seawater basically hugs the coastline and moves south. So this is useful for environmental impact assessments, but also for tracking the. We know the properties of this water, of this discharge water, and we can predict the plume area. We can then predict the additional carbon dioxide that's sequestered into the ocean. So this is then just again showing the dispersion of the discharge water as the plume, and then also we can predict the plume area from that and use that to calculate the additional carbon dioxide uptake. Okay, that was all I was going to show. So again, yeah, thank you very much. And any questions?
Thank you very much for a very interesting talk. I have a couple of questions, but just sort of one. In terms of you said you're looking at nutrient-rich water, so does that remove nutrients that would be used by other biomass in the ocean in order to remove carbon dioxide? So are there other like nitrates and things?
No, so it's a good question because so generally I think we've so one of the things we do is obviously have to create a long environmental baseline to make sure our impact is not, or the impact of this is not affecting that. And because we're in an upwelling region, it's really robust in terms of the nutrient content. It's always having more nutrients applied to the surface ocean. So I think relatively the amount of nutrients we're removing to the ponds is less than a fraction of a percent. So there's no, if anything, would expect to have a slight enhancement of offshore net primary productivity rather than a decrease. So, but well within sort of environmental baselines.
Thank you very much. I have a number more questions I wish to ask you, but for the interest of timing, I'm going to have to stop us there.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. Alexander, are you available to present the slides?
Yeah, so before we start, I'd like to thank you for the invitation to present here, and also thanks to Archer for providing such a great computing service. So today I'm going to talk about my entry about flow past the succulent inspired cylinders. Okay, start sharing. Can you see the slides?
Not yet.
Because I can't. Oh yeah, okay.
Oh, they're loading now. They've just loaded. Fantastic.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm pretty sure that everyone has seen a cactus before, but probably not everyone knows that all cacti but one originate from the Western Hemisphere. Cacti differ in size and shape from very small species, like those you might have at home or at your desk, to very big species, like this saguaro cactus shown here, which grows in southwest of US and north of Mexico, and can reach up to 15 meters in height. And it was noticed that despite their shallow root system, saguaro cacti can withstand high wind loads without being uprooted or broken. And the number of experimental and numerical investigations show that the presence of ribs on a cactus trunk reduces the drag force that is experienced by saguaro cactus, and also reduces the amplitude of unsteady force fluctuations compared to the circular cylinder. And on this side of the Earth, in the eastern hemisphere, we have succulents that have independently developed same plant features as cacti, including ribs and spines, and this happened in the process that is known as convergent evolution. However, in general, succulents tend to have lower number of ribs compared to cacti. So if plant aerodynamics were one of the factors driving the convergent evolution of cacti and succulents, a succulent-shaped cylinder with a low number of ribs would be expected also to display aerodynamic advantages. And in this project, we use numerical and experimental techniques to study passive flow control inspired by succulents. So we conducted large eddy simulation as a part of this project, and these large eddy simulations were performed on ARCHER using open source CFD solver OpenFOAM. So the studied cylinder was inspired by a number of succulents with 4 ribs, and we investigated aerodynamic properties of these cylinders at different angular orientation with respect to the incoming flow. And also these simulations were performed at biologically relevant Reynolds number. So moving to some results. So the results show that the aerodynamic coefficients, such as the mean drag force coefficient shown on the left and the fluctuating lift force coefficient, show a strong dependence on the angular orientation of the cylinder with respect to the flow. And from these plots, we can also notice that at one particular orientation, we can see the minimum values of the drag force coefficient and the minimum value of the fluctuating lift force coefficient. And this angle is known as critical angle. And the other aerodynamic quantities, which are not shown here, also reach extrema at this orientation, at this one particular orientation. So the image I submitted for the ARCHER2 image competition shows the vertical structures around and in the wake of a succulent-inspired cylinder with 4 ribs. And in this image, we can see a physical mechanism behind the observed behavior of the force coefficient. Namely, we can see the reattachment of the flow that is separated from the front rib or upstream rib of the cylinder at the downstream rib of the succulent-inspired cylinder, which happens over the bottom part of the cylinder. And this leads to the reduction of the drag force and also decreases the amplitude of the unsteady lift force fluctuations. And this significant dependence of the aerodynamic characteristics on the orientation of the succulent with respect to the flow direction may have influence in the real world. For example, the stems of the succulents may be oriented with respect to the prevailing wind in a way to minimize the negative impact from the wind loadings. However, to draw some strong conclusions, we actually need to perform further studies, because currently there is no information available on this in the literature. And in the end, I would like to point out why we need large eddy simulations for these studies. So as I mentioned in the beginning, large eddy simulations on ARCHER were just a part of this project. And in other parts, we performed wind tunnel measurements and also 2D unsteady Reynolds average Navier-Stokes simulations, which are significantly cheaper from computational viewpoint compared to large eddy simulation. And the results of the 2D URAN simulations also presented in this slide with these light blue crosses. And when we compare results of the URAN simulations with experimental data, we can see that while overall they capture the trends in the behavior of the force coefficients, there is a significant quantitative mismatch in the values at all angles of attack. And also, while they capture the presence of the critical angle, the value of this angle is also significantly underpredicted. So overall, the URAN's approach provides useful insights into the key features of the flow past the succulent-inspired cylinder, but for close quantitative agreement to experimental data, we need the 3D eddy resolve methods, such as large eddy simulations. And we can see that the results of our large eddy simulation show pretty good agreement with the experimental data. And because large eddy simulations are quite expensive from a computational point of view, we need a high-performance computing system such as ARCHER2. If you're interested in this results on the flow past succulent-inspired cylinders, you can check these publications, which covers large eddy simulation, experimental study, and also URAN study. And that's it for this talk. So thank you for attending it, and I'm happy to take any questions if you have.
Thank you very much. I have one question, which is around, you said that it's computationally more expensive. Could you give that in relative terms between the two simulations?
Well, you see, we didn't perform 2D runs, obviously, on a high-performance computing system. Like, we did them, so part of them I ran on my desktop PC, which maybe took like 2 days on, I think at that time I had 8 cores. Part of them were conducted using the cluster at the University of Glasgow, so there we're talking about maybe 8 cores, while to perform large eddy simulation. So I remember I tried to run large eddy simulation on the Glasgow Uni cluster. I think there I was using maybe 24, 36 cores, and it took me a couple of months, but this was just like for the circular cylinder without any modification. When we have a more complex cross-section, like for this succulent-inspired cylinder, we obviously need more grid points. So in the end, like those simulations I ran on Archer and also on Cirrus, I can't remember how many cores I use exactly, because well, nodes actually, because it was like now a couple of years ago, but probably around like 8 nodes. So for Cirrus it's times 32, as far as I remember, or 36, and it took maybe like 7-10 runs to get enough data for statistical quantities.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you again to all our speakers today for coming and presenting some bit more behind the images you submitted. It was excellent to see the source work that you were able to produce from running on the system. A couple of things I want to highlight before we end today would be that we have our next webinar is going to be, I think, on the 22nd of November. This will be a series of lightning talks by Michael Barefoot, who will discuss a variety of topics. I think that's going to be listed soon. And also, I would encourage all of our speakers to sign up for the ARCHER2 Celebration of Science that is planned now for the 7th to 8th of March next year. I think there's an open call for posters related for that, so I'm sure we would very much welcome all of you to come and present at that event and show off more about what you've been producing using ARCHER2. Anyway, thank you. We're going to close the session now, but thank you again to everyone who's attended, and I hope to hear from you all and see you all at another event.